that, on this program, what we try to do is we try to get people to understand the importance of taking a stand for your country. And sometimes, of course, taking a stand is not always necessarily popular. And when you look throughout the ages where people have taken a stand, whether it's at a local level or even at a national level, within that particular moment, it's not always popular, but it is necessary because you want to bring about a certain level of justice and you want to bring about a certain level of fairness. Now, I'm saying this in the context of the now famous budget 2018. And let me just say as a start, you remember I keep coming on this program and kept talking about building national consensus to equitably, I hear the word, equitably share the burden of adjustment. I kept saying that over every week. It was the position of the progressive trade union movement and the progressive movement in general. How do we build national consensus? Now, the process for building that national consensus would have been the mechanism to do that would have been the National Tripartite Advisory Council. In other words, that would have been the space in which you can build the national consensus. That opportunity was lost. The government did not take proper leadership in pulling the various key sectors together. And here are the key words here. Building national consensus. That's one set of keywords. And the next set, so building national consensus. And then the next one, equitably sharing the burden of adjustment. This is the two in the equation that has to come together for us to come out of this crisis. That was not done. Instead, what happened was instead of building national consensus, there was a proposal to have a PR event whereby everyone will come on national television and deliver presentations. In effect, that's what it was. And then take questions from the floor, like a panel discussion. In other words, that was no process to build consensus. Because if we don't have consensus on how we equitably share the burden of adjustment, we are going to have difficulties. Okay. Then, right after that, just a few days after this PR event, you have then what is called the imposition of sharing the burden of adjustment. And what that did, by not building consensus, national consensus, by not having an effective and genuine process of consultation, what in effect you did is have an inequitable sharing of the burden of adjustment. So you have a classical neoliberal budget, which have been properly themed by the progressive movement. Comrade Roger has always mentioned it, an anti-people austerity budget. That's basically what it was. As a matter of fact, that should have been the theme of the Minister of Finance presentation. Anti-people austerity budget. Entrenching neoliberal policies, which is so unfortunate, because after some 15 years of neoliberal policies in this country, we haven't spent some $750 billion. Trinidad and Tobago is at the lower end of the Human Development Index. And we have now, after all these years of neoliberal policies and all these years of having huge expenditure in terms of budget, what in fact you have now, with only just about 2 to 3 years of low oil and gas price, you have these severe austerity measures. Now, here is the trick or sleight of hand. Instead of building that national consensus, instead what you do, as I said, you impose the burden. But more than that, is you create a boogeyman called the IMF, saying to the population, we do not want to go to the IMF, but you implement IMF recommendations, and I'm going to come to subsidies because that's one of the core recommendations coming out of the IMF, to countries, oil-producing countries across the globe. Unfortunately, we foolishly bought into it. Other countries did not, and they held on to their subsidies. So whilst you say that, so you're convincing me, okay, take the austerity measures, which the IMF had recommended anyway, in order not to go to the IMF. You see the sleight of hand. So we are now convinced to accept these austerity measures and these heavy burdens, and we'll get into a little bit more details as to what these burdens are. We do not factor in the role of corruption and mismanagement of state enterprise, who's supposed to be helping with growing the economy. So what you had was the milking of NGC and the mismanagement of Petrotrin. Now, workers and trade unions had nothing to do with that. The workers and ordinary poor people, low-income earners, persons who are working for minimum wages, persons who have their small shops and so on, they did not bleed NGC and mismanage Petrotrin. That was done by political directorates in collaboration with their friends and financiers. We have to put it where it is. So, having fleeced the country, having milked these key state enterprises, mismanaged them, you're then asking ordinary people to bear the full burden on top of that, to pay for that. Now, one of the other things that you realize, and I don't even hear many of the what we call the bourgeois economists, and Trinidad and Tobago today, I want to qualify them. Bourgeois economists. These are, let's be clear, when they come on to whether it's radio or television and so on, they speak with a certain level of authority because they called economists. But let's be clear where they are trained. These are economists who have been trained in the Western economic liberal model. Let's be clear. That's what it is. And therefore, their comments and their analysis is to support an existing economic model, neoliberal model, which said model does not benefit ordinary working people. So, for example, don't you think it's strange that there isn't sufficient mention that one of the key factors as to why we have the deficit is because the state and taxpayers had to bail out a private enterprise called CL Financial. Not to bail out any state enterprise. You see, let's be clear. It wasn't, they didn't bail out a state enterprise in Trinidad and Tobago. They bail out a private enterprise that cost the taxpayers cost us $23 billion. Now, you know why there isn't enough emphasis on it? Because they still want to implement a neoliberal policy of privatization. So they have to downplay the disaster of CL Financial and the disaster of the private sector's greed, mismanagement, and corruption, downplay that in order to convince you and me that we have to privatize key state enterprise. When in fact, the private sector has proven to have failed our country. The government approach to Trinidad and Tobago, whilst we kept talking about growing the economy, what we have is a government that has decided to tax its way out of the crisis. Now, there has to be some difficulty with that. So no growth, but taxes. Tax your way out of the crisis, which apparently based on, I was a very, very young person during the times of Chambers, right? And even during the latter times of Eric Williams. I don't want to give away my age. I just want to say I was very young. So I am not pretty much on corral with it, but I am told and I am aware that it is the same type of economic policy. When there's an economic crisis, what you try to do is you just try to tax your way out of it. Now here's the difficulty with that. What happens, because you're not growing the economy. If you're not growing the economy, therefore the economy is not getting larger, therefore there isn't economic activity. So you're trying to tax your way out of it. You're not growing it. By doing that, you've taken more money out of the hands of people, consumers, so people have less disposable income to buy and to contribute to the economy. So which means the economy is going to drag. So what happens next year? Are we going to have more taxes? And then the year after that, more taxes? It doesn't even make logical sense. Now, they then decide to remove the fuel subsidy. As I mentioned earlier, And I saw things going around on Facebook and so on about our energy prices, the fuel prices. And let me remind people who are trying to put that point, I'm not even sure of its relevance. Those countries import fuel. They import it. They have to buy it at the international market price. Then they have to pay for transportation. And then they have to pay for mortgage and a whole range of infrastructural things to get that product to them. So, of course, it'll be more expensive because in Trinidad and Tobago, we produce it. In other words, we do not import gasoline. We do not import diesel. We do not import LPG. We do not import airplane fuel even. None of these fuel we import. It is produced right here in Trinidad and Tobago. So let's just dismiss that argument. But let's get to what is at the core of it. That will hurt poor, ordinary people. And we can't just ignore that and pretend that will have a little effect. It will not have little effect because immediately there will be an increase in the cost of living, increase in transportation. Do you know, just last week when we were giving out flyers at Citygate, a janitor at Citygate, he saw me and he said, boy, I'm glad all they're doing this, You know, they raised my rent from $1,800 to $2,500. Because everybody's going to use the opportunity to do the markup, right? That is the reality because he's probably earning $4,500 to $5,000. So now, and then here's his next thing. He said, I have 3 kids, I know studying. Well, how am I, if the rent going up so much and then the increased transportation costs, how am I putting food on the table? I mean, we cannot ignore that that story is the story of many, many people across this country. So who's going to feel it? What about retirees and pensioners? Remember their income not going up. So now the retirees and pensioners on fixed income have to face increased costs in terms of groceries and so on. Minimum wage earners, low-income families, single parents, unemployed, the poor, farmers, fishermen, youth, people at the lowest end of the economic ladder. In other words, the most vulnerable. But you know what? They don't count. They don't count. So, here's this. When you really understand the depth of the injustice, so you say you tax corporate companies, and banks, but we all know what's going to happen. That is passed on to who? It's passed down the ladder. So they can absorb that and pass it down in increased costs. But let me ask you, you are a minimum wage earner. Who do you pass the cost on to? Who do you pass it on to? When the maxi fare goes up, when the grocery and food goes up, when your rent go up, when you want to buy things for the children in school, and no. Based on all of these austerity measures, in schools you have to buy almost everything now, including crayons. So what happened to the parents who can't even afford to buy crayons for the children? But you know what? They don't count, right? So all of that cost and all of that burden is taken on by ordinary people. So the taxes of the elites and the corporate and banking sector is just transferred downwards to ordinary people. And that will create so much an extreme hardship on people. So much hardship on people and who don't have a disposable income and enough disposable income, yes, to be able to contribute to the economy. The economy is going to lose more than $550 million. But the contracts not getting cut, Calco, and all the rest of them still getting contracts. What about this the firm that transporting prisoners up and down? I didn't see a cut in their contract, And a matter of fact, based on what has happened now with crime going up, then we'll get an even bigger contract to transport more and more prisoners. So that the wealthy becoming more wealthy whilst we take the burden. So you know what this is like? It reminded me, I was reading recently the story of the peasant uprising in England in 1381. And what triggered that uprising was this. So the king says, listen, I need to tax you more in order to fight a war against France, because they were involved in the 100-Year War. So the king appealed to national sentiments. We are fighting this war in order for freedom and da-da-da. Okay. So I have to tax you, the peasants, more. Then the peasants realized, but wait now, hang on. You're saying you have to tax me more, so I have to put more. I have to grow more crop, and whatever I got for the crop that I had, I have to pay more. But then I realized that the Lord of the Manor living life real nice. So you've taxed me under the illusion that you're using my sentiments to wage war. I'm going to draw this link. I'm going to draw a link between a 1381 peasants' revolt and today. You use me, get me to pay more from the crop that I have, convincing me that I have to finance this war, touching on my national sentiments. But in fact, what you did is you put more wealth in the pockets of the Lord of the Manor. Fast forward, how many 100 years? To 2017, and a Twin Island Republic in Trinidad and Tobago. You convince me you have to close the deficit gap. You convince me that the country has no money. Appeal to my national sentiment to accept the burden, but then when I check it out, that burden in the corporate and the elite world is not being carried by them at all. In fact, that increased cost, because remember the revenue is now smaller, so that the amount of the pie that would have gone to the elites would have shrunk. So in order to maintain their piece of the pie, you tax me and have me now pay increased cost of living with my little salary in order for them to maintain their piece of the economic pie. No, that is truly deeply unjust and unfair. And I think it's really a matter of time. Well, before I even go to that, on top of that, to make matters worse, you, as the state officials, get this curve, don't pay taxes. So you have government and opposition benefiting from a measure. So listen, let's just understand the incredible injustice of this. So you are trying to appeal to my sentiments by talking about Mercedes-Benz and BMW and Audi. Now let's just follow this carefully. So you're trying to appeal to my sentiments. Listen, this tax on the vehicles is for those people who drive in that. No. When you check, because he didn't tax BMW and Audi, he taxed the engine size. When you check, you know what that engine size also include? Sportage. Vehicles. So that the middle income earner can no longer afford it. So guess what? The only people that can afford those vehicles which normal middle income people would have been able to afford are, guess what? Higher income persons. So you know what? You increase the inequality gap. That is what this budget has done. You see, when the fanfare and the smoke and the dust is cleared, when that reality starts to bite into us, when you go to the gas station, now, I mean, you might still feel it for the first couple weeks, you know. But here when it starts to bite, when your pay come and you realize that, wait now, is 20% of my pay just additional just going in fuel? When you pull up and you said, well, all right, I have $200, I could pay down 120 and I could fill up. Your 200 gone. When those realities start to bite, then will people begin to understand the how anti-people this budget is. But I always like to juxtapose that curve, that not everybody feeling this. It is not everybody feeling this. So now you as government ministers, you could have 3 Porsche Cayennes, 3 or 2 Mercedes-Benz Audi. You benefiting from this tax exempt, but we ordinary people now have to face that tax burden. So in other words, what in fact you have is this deep-rooted system of governance that always guarantee that the elites continue to enrich themselves on the backs of ordinary working people who now have to face increased cost of living. I see news update is here. So I want to just wrap up because I actually wanted to speak a little bit about the alternative. I just want to leave this with Trinidad and Tobago till next week. Next week, I'm going to focus on the alternative. But now having described the reality of this anti-people budget, next week, we are going to talk about Labour's economic alternative plan, meaning there is an alternative way. We did not have to go the route of austerity. We did not have to go the route of entrenching neoliberalism. We didn't have to go the route of taxing, hurting more and more young, poor, ordinary working people. So as I close Trinidad and Tobago, yes, we have to take a stand for this country because the inequality gap, which is going to increase, the pain and suffering that ordinary poor people are going to feel in the coming weeks and months is going to boil over. Thank you very much. This has been Ozzi Warwick with another installment of Take a Stand for Trinidad and Tobago. So until next week, I wish everyone Shubh Diwali, and I really hope indeed we see some light at the end of this very dark tunnel. Thank you.
Take a stand for TNT. Join us every Monday.